The storm came without warning, tearing through the Transylvanian forest like the wrath of God himself. Elena ran through the darkness, her thin dress clinging to her body, soaked through by the relentless rain. Her feet were bare and bleeding, cut by stones and thorns, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Behind her lay the village that had cast her out, the man who had rejected her, and the family who had tried to sell her to a stranger twice her age. Before her lay only wilderness, darkness, and the certainty of death. She had refused the marriage. She had stood before her father, before the village elder, before the merchant with his cold eyes and colder hands, and she had said no. The word had cost her everything. Her father struck her across the face and called her ungrateful. Her mother wept and said she had shamed them all. The man she loved, the blacksmith's son with his warm smile and promises, whispered in the shadow of the chapel, had turned away from her without a word. He would marry the baker's daughter instead, a girl with a dowry and a compliant heart. So Elena had run. She had taken nothing but the dress on her back and a small wooden cross her grandmother had given her before she died. She ran into the forest at dusk, and the storm found her an hour later. Now the night was black as pitch, the rain fell in sheets, and Elena knew with a terrible clarity that she would not survive until morning. Lightning split the sky, and for one brilliant moment she saw the mouth of a cave ahead, a dark opening in the hillside like the entrance to the underworld itself. She stumbled toward it, her legs trembling with exhaustion, and collapsed just inside the threshold. The sound of the rain became muffled, distant. The wind no longer clawed at her. She lay on the cold stone floor, shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might shatter. She was going to die here, alone, unloved, cast out by everyone who should have protected her. The thought brought not fear, but a strange, hollow relief. At least it would be over. At least she would not have to wake tomorrow and face another day of rejection and shame. But then she heard it. A footstep. Soft, deliberate, impossibly close. Elena's eyes flew open and she tried to push herself up, but her arms had no strength left. A shadow moved in the deeper darkness of the cave. A figure, tall, silent, moving toward her with the unhurried grace of something that had all the time in the world. Terror seized her, sharp and primal. She tried to scream, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The figure stopped a few feet away, and another flash of lightning illuminated him for just a moment. A man, pale as death itself, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. He wore clothing from another century, a long black coat with silver fastenings, a high collar, boots that made no sound on the stone. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, and Elena felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. She should run. She knew she should run, but her body would not obey. She could only lie there, trembling, waiting for whatever fate had found her in this God-forsaken cave. The man moved again, and this time he knelt beside her. Elena flinched, but he made no move to touch her. Instead, he reached behind himself and drew off the long cloak he wore. It was lined with dark red silk and smelled of something she could not name, something ancient and rich and strange. He laid it over her gently, covering her shivering body, and the warmth of it was immediate and overwhelming. Elena stared up at him, confusion cutting through her fear. His face was beautiful in a way that seemed inhuman, all sharp angles and perfect symmetry, unmarred by time or hardship. But there was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like sadness. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply sat back against the cave wall a few feet away and watched her with that same unreadable expression. She wanted to ask who he was. She wanted to demand why he was here, what he wanted from her. But exhaustion was dragging her down like an anchor, pulling her into deep water. The warmth of the cloak, the cessation of the wind and rain, the simple fact that she was no longer alone, all of it conspired to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. She fought against it for a moment, some instinct warning her that sleep was dangerous, that she should not close her eyes in the presence of this strange, silent man. But her body had reached its limit. Her last conscious thought was that if she was going to die, at least it would be warm. At least someone, even a stranger, had shown her a kindness in her final moments. Elena slept. She did not know how long she slept. It felt like falling through darkness, deep and dreamless and absolute. When she finally began to surface, it was not to the sound of rain or the cold stone of the cave floor. It was to warmth, real warmth, the kind that sank into her bones and made her want to burrow deeper into it and never emerge. She kept her eyes closed for a long moment, hovering in that space between sleep and waking, aware only of comfort, softness beneath her, warmth around her, the faint smell of candle wax and old wood, and something floral she could not identify. Her body ached, but it was a distant ache, the kind that came after a crisis had passed. Slowly, carefully, Elena opened her eyes. She was not in the cave. She was lying in a bed, an enormous bed with carved wooden posts that stretched toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. The mattress beneath her was softer than anything she had ever felt, piled with furs and blankets of deep crimson and black. Velvet curtains hung from the posts, partially drawn back to reveal a room that took her breath away. It was vast. The walls were stone, ancient and grey, hung with tapestries depicting scenes of battles and hunts and strange, contorted figures she could not quite make sense of. A fireplace large enough to stand in dominated one wall, flames crackling within it and casting dancing shadows across everything. Candles burned in iron sconces, dozens of them, their light warm and golden and strangely hypnotic. The windows were tall and narrow, and through them she could see only darkness and the faint suggestion of mountains against a sky beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Elena sat up slowly, her heart beginning to pound. This was not the cave. This was not anywhere she recognized. This was a castle. A real castle, the kind she had only heard about in stories told by traveling merchants and old women who claimed to remember the days when nobles still ruled these lands. How had she gotten here? The last thing she remembered was the cave, the storm, the silent stranger with his pale face and dark eyes. Had he brought her here, but why? And where was here? She pushed back the blankets and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her feet touched cold stone floor, and she realized with a start that she was no longer wearing her torn, muddy dress. Someone had dressed her in a nightgown of white linen, soft and clean and far too fine for someone like her. Her cross was still around her neck, the small wooden pendant resting against her chest, and the sight of it brought a small measure of comfort. She stood, her legs shaky but holding, and walked slowly toward one of the windows. The glass was old and warped, making the view outside shimmer and distort, but she could see enough. Mountains, forest, stone walls falling away into a dizzying drop. She was high up, very high up, and there was nothing around this place but wilderness as far as the eye could see. A sound behind her made her spin around, her hand clutching the cross. The door, a massive thing of dark wood banded with iron, was opening. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere. She could only stand there and watch as the door swung inward and the figure from the cave stepped into the room. He looked exactly as he had in the darkness, pale and beautiful and utterly wrong in some way she could not articulate. He wore different clothes now, a white shirt with a high collar and a black vest embroidered with silver thread, but the same ageless quality clung to him like a second skin. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at her, his expression as unreadable as it had been in the cave. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elena wanted to demand answers, to scream at him, to run past him and out that door. But something in his gaze held her frozen in place. It was not threatening. That was what disturbed her most. There was no anger in his eyes, no lust, no cruelty. There was only that same strange sadness and something else, something that looked almost like curiosity. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and smooth, with an accent she could not place, and it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "You are awake." "Good. I was beginning to wonder if the fever would claim you." Fever. Eleanor's hand went to her forehead. She did not feel feverish now, but she remembered the bone-deep cold of the cave, the violent shivering that had racked her body. How long had she been unconscious? "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You are in my home. You collapsed in the cave during the storm. I brought you here. Your home." Eleanor looked around at the vast, shadowy room, the ancient tapestries, the flickering candles. "This is a castle." "Yes." "Who are you?" He was silent for a moment, and something flickered across his face, something that might have been amusement or might have been pain. "My name is not important. What matters is that you are safe here. The storm has passed. You will recover your strength, and then, if you wish, you may leave." Elena's mind was racing. None of this made sense. Nobles did not live in these mountains anymore. The old castles had been abandoned for generations, left to rot and crumble into the earth. Everyone knew that. And yet here she stood, in a room more luxurious than anything she had ever imagined, speaking to a man who looked like he had stepped out of a history book. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No," he said quietly. "I do not know you. But I remember what it is to be cast out. I remember what it is to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I could not leave you there to die." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made Elena's throat tighten. There was a weight to them, a depth of feeling that seemed to stretch back centuries. She wanted to ask him what he meant, who had cast him out, but she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. "I should go," she said, though even as she said it, she knew it was foolish. She had no shoes, no cloak, no idea where she was or how to get back to anything resembling civilization. And even if she could find her way, where would she go? Back to the village that had rejected her, back to the family that had tried to sell her. The man seemed to read her thoughts. "It is almost dawn," he said. "The forest is dangerous, especially for someone alone and unarmed. There are wolves and other things. Stay, rest, eat. When you are stronger, I will provide you with supplies and directions, but do not leave now. You will not survive a second night in the wilderness." Elena wanted to argue, but she could not. He was right. She knew he was right. And more than that, something in his voice made her want to trust him, despite every instinct screaming that she should not. "Very well," she said finally. "I will stay, but only until I'm strong enough to leave." The man inclined his head slightly, a gesture that seemed oddly formal, almost courtly. "As you wish." He turned to go, and Elena found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Wait." He paused, looking back at her. "What is your name? If I am to stay here, even for a day, I should know what to call you." For a moment, she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, and his voice was so quiet she almost did not hear it. "Dracula. My name is Dracula." The word hung in the air between them like a curse. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Every child in the Carpathian villages grew up hearing stories of Count Dracula, the undead lord, the creature who fed on blood and fear, the monster who had terrorized these lands for centuries before vanishing into legend. It was a name used to frighten children into obedience, a ghost story told around fires on winter nights. It could not be real, it could not be him. But as she looked into those pale, ageless eyes, Eleanor knew with a terrible certainty that it was. She had fallen asleep beside a stranger in a cave, and she had woken in the castle of Count Dracula himself. Eleanor stood frozen in place, long after Dracula had left the room, his name echoing in her mind like the tolling of a funeral bell. Count Dracula. The name every mother whispered to keep her children from wandering too far into the woods. The legend that had haunted these mountains for as long as anyone could remember. And she was standing in his castle, wearing a nightgown he had provided, having slept under his protection. Her hand tightened around the wooden cross at her neck. It was warm from her skin, solid and real, and she clung to it, like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. She should run. She should find a way out of this place immediately, storm or no storm, wolves or no wolves. Anything was better than staying here with him. But even as the thought formed, doubt crept in behind it. He had not harmed her. He had saved her life, brought her to warmth and safety, given her his cloak when she was dying of cold. Monsters did not do such things, did they? Unless he was keeping her alive for some darker purpose. Unless he was simply waiting until she was stronger, healthier, before he revealed his true intentions. The thought made her stomach twist with fear. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Before she could respond, the door opened and a woman entered carrying a silver tray. She was small and elderly, dressed in black from head to toe, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined with age, but her movements were quick and efficient as she set the tray down on a small table near the fireplace. "Good morning, miss." The woman's voice was raspy but not unkind. "The master said you would be hungry. I have brought you breakfast." Elena stared at her, trying to reconcile the mundane normalcy of the scene with the horror of where she was. "Who are you?" "My name is Marta. I have served this household for many years." The woman straightened, folding her hands in front of her. "You need not fear me, child. I mean you no harm." "But your master," Elena said, her voice shaking. "He is Count Dracula. He is a monster." Marta's expression did not change. "The master is many things. But he saved your life. That much is true, is it not?" Elena had no answer to that. She looked at the tray on the table. Bread still warm, cheese, fresh fruit, a pot of tea that sent fragrant steam curling into the air. Her stomach cramped with hunger so intense it made her dizzy. How long had it been since she had eaten? 2 days? 3? "Eat," Marta said gently. "Whatever you believe about this place, you will need your strength. And the master has given strict orders that you are to be treated as an honored guest, not a prisoner. An honored guest in a monster's castle." The absurdity of it would have made Elena laugh if she were not so frightened. But the food was real, and her hunger was real, and she found herself moving toward the table almost against her will. She sat in the chair by the fire and took a piece of bread. It was fresh, the crust crackling under her fingers, the inside soft and warm. She bit into it and nearly wept at the taste. She had not realized how close to starvation she had been. She ate quickly, without grace or manners, tearing off chunks of bread and cheese and stuffing them into her mouth. Marta watched her with something that might have been pity. When the worst of her hunger was satisfied, Elena forced herself to slow down. She poured tea into the delicate china cup and sipped it, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It was good tea, better than anything she had ever tasted at home. Everything here was better than anything she had known. The irony was not lost on her. "Where is he?" Elena asked. "Count Dracula. Where has he gone?" "The master keeps to his own chambers during the day. You will not see him until nightfall." "Because he cannot bear the sunlight," Elena said, remembering the old stories. Marta's expression flickered with something Elena could not read. "The master has his reasons for keeping the hours he does. It is not my place to explain them." Elena set down her cup. "Am I truly free to leave? Or is that a lie?" "It is not a lie. The master does not keep prisoners here, not anymore, not anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena wanted to ask what that meant, but she was not sure she wanted to know. Instead, she asked, "How long have you served him?" Marta was quiet for a long moment. "Longer than you have been alive, child. Longer than your mother has been alive. I came to this castle as a girl, much like yourself. I had nowhere else to go. He gave me shelter and purpose. I have remained ever since." "By choice?" Marta smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "At first, no. But time changes many things. Now I stay because this is my home. Because the master, for all that he is, has never once raised a hand against me or treated me with anything but respect." "Can you say the same of the village you fled from?" The question cut deep because Elena could not. The village had treated her like property. Her father had beaten her for refusing to obey. The man she loved had abandoned her without a second thought, and the Count, the monster, had wrapped her in his cloak and carried her to safety. "You look troubled," Marta said. "That is understandable. But I will tell you something, and you may believe it or not as you choose. The master is not the creature the stories make him out to be. He is dangerous, yes. He is powerful beyond your understanding. But he is not cruel, not needlessly, and he has not fed on human blood in many, many years." Elena looked up sharply. "Fed on blood." The words made it real in a way that chilled her to the bone. "Then the stories are true. He is a vampire." "Yes," Marta said simply. "He is. And yet you serve him." "I do." "Why?" because I have seen the man beneath the monster, because I have watched him struggle with what he is and what he once was, because I believe, perhaps foolishly, that redemption is possible even for the damned. Elena wanted to argue, to say that monsters could not be redeemed, that the undead had no souls, and therefore no hope of salvation. But the conviction in Marta's voice gave her pause. This woman had lived here for decades. She knew Dracula in ways Elena never could. And she stayed by choice. After Marta left, Elena found clothing laid out for her on the bed, a dress of deep green wool, simple but well made, with a white chemise to wear beneath it, stockings. Soft leather shoes that fit her perfectly, though she could not imagine how anyone had known her size. She dressed slowly, her mind still reeling from everything she had learned. When she was ready, she went to the door and opened it cautiously. Beyond was a hallway of stone, dimly lit by candles in iron sconces. She stepped out, expecting someone to stop her, but the hallway was empty. She could go anywhere, it seemed, explore this castle freely, or try to find her way out. She chose to explore. The castle was vast, beyond comprehension. Room after room stretched before her, each one filled with relics of centuries past. Libraries with thousands of books in languages she could not read. Chambers filled with paintings of stern-faced nobles who seemed to watch her as she passed. A music room with instruments she had never seen before. A dining hall with a table that could seat 50 people, though dust lay thick upon it as if it had not been used in decades. Everywhere she went, candles burned. Someone was keeping them lit, maintaining this place, though she saw no one but Marta. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps and the occasional whisper of wind through the stone corridors. She found herself in a chapel. It was small compared to the other rooms, but beautiful in its simplicity. Wooden pews faced a simple altar. Above the altar hung a crucifix, and Elena felt something loosen in her chest at the sight of it. She walked forward slowly and knelt before the altar, her hands clasped around her own small cross. She tried to pray, but the words would not come. What could she say? Thank God for delivering her into the hands of a vampire. Ask forgiveness for not fleeing while she had the chance. Beg for guidance in a situation that defied all logic and reason? In the end, she simply knelt there in silence, trying to quiet the storm in her mind. I built this chapel 300 years ago. Elena gasped and spun around. Dracula stood in the doorway, a shadow among shadows. She had not heard him approach, had not sensed his presence until he spoke. Her heart hammered in her chest. I thought you could not enter holy ground, she said, her voice shaking. Dracula stepped into the chapel, and Elena saw that he cast no shadow in the candlelight. Another one of the legends proven true. He moved with inhuman grace, stopping a few feet from where she knelt. There are many stories about what I can and cannot do. Most of them are exaggerations or outright fabrications. I can enter this chapel because I built it with my own hands, stone by stone, in a time when I still believed redemption might be possible. Elena rose slowly to her feet, putting the altar between herself and him. But you are damned, cursed. How can there be redemption for something like you? Something flickered across his face, something that might have been pain. You speak as if damnation were a simple thing, as if it were absolute and unchanging. But I have lived for centuries, Elena. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched the world change in ways you cannot imagine, and in all that time, I have never stopped wondering if there might be a way back. If somewhere, somehow, God might still hear the prayers of a monster. The vulnerability in his voice shocked her. This was not how monsters were supposed to speak. They were supposed to be cruel and mocking and full of rage. They were not supposed to sound lost and weary and achingly human. Why did you bring me here? Elena asked. What do you want from me? Dracula looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Loneliness, profound and ancient and terrible. I do not know, he said quietly. When I saw you in that cave, dying from cold and exhaustion and heartbreak, I felt something I have not felt in more years than I can count. Compassion, the desire to protect something fragile and innocent from the cruelty of the world. I acted on impulse, without thought to the consequences. And now you are here and I find myself at a loss. You feel compassion. Elena's voice was thick with disbelief. You are a vampire. You have killed countless people. You have brought terror to these lands for centuries. And you expect me to believe you feel compassion? I have killed, yes. Dracula's voice was flat, empty. More than you can imagine. I have done terrible things in the name of hunger and survival and rage. I do not deny what I am or what I have done. But that does not mean I'm incapable of other feelings. It does not mean I am beyond the reach of mercy or the desire for something better than what I have become. Elena stared at him, torn between fear and something else she could not name. He was a monster. She knew he was a monster, but he was also standing in a chapel he had built with his own hands, speaking of redemption with a voice full of sorrow. I want to leave, she said, tomorrow. I will accept whatever supplies you offer and I will go. Dracula nodded slowly. If that is your wish, I will not stop you. But know this, the world you fled from has not changed. The village will not welcome you back. The man you loved will not suddenly see your worth. You will be alone and vulnerable, and winter is coming. Here you are safe. Here you have shelter and food and protection. I ask nothing of you in return. Nothing. Eleanor's voice was sharp with suspicion. Monsters always want something. I want only your company, Dracula said, and there was such naked honesty in his words that Elena felt her certainty waver. For centuries I have lived in this castle, with only servants bound to me by enchantment or obligation. I have not spoken to another soul as an equal in longer than I can remember. You are the first person in generations who has looked at me with fear, yes, but also with curiosity, with the possibility that I might be more than the legend. I would keep that, if only for a little while. But I will not force you to stay. Elena's mind raced. Every instinct told her to run, to take the first opportunity to escape this place and never look back. But another part of her, a part she did not fully understand, whispered that perhaps he was telling the truth. Perhaps he truly did want nothing more than someone to talk to, someone who might see him as more than a monster. I will think about it, she said finally. Dracula inclined his head. That is all I ask. He turned to leave, but Elena called out to him. Wait. If I stay, even for a few days, I need to know something. The stories say you feed on blood. Is that true? Yes. Do you intend to feed on me? No. Dracula's voice was firm, absolute. I have not fed on a human in many years. I survive on other means. You have nothing to fear from me in that regard. Other means? Animals, livestock. It is not the same, but it sustains me. I made a choice long ago to stop taking human life. I have kept that promise to myself, no matter how difficult it has been. Why? Why would you make such a choice? Because I grew tired of being a monster. Because I wanted to believe that I could be something else, even if only in small ways. Because the memory of every life I took haunts me still, and I could not bear to add more ghosts to that burden. Eleanor looked at him, at this creature of legend standing in the chapel he had built, speaking of ghosts and burdens and the desire to be something other than what he was. And despite everything, despite all logic and reason, she found herself believing him. I will stay, she said quietly, for a little while, until I decide what to do next. Dracula's expression softened, and for just a moment he looked almost human. Thank you, he said. You will not regret this. But as Elena watched him leave the chapel, moving like smoke through the doorway, she wondered if she already did. The days that followed took on a strange, dreamlike quality. Eleanor moved through the castle like a ghost herself, exploring its endless corridors and forgotten chambers, while Dracula remained sequestered in whatever dark corner he called his own. She saw him only at night, when the sun had set and the castle became his domain once more. He would find her wherever she was, reading in the library or standing at a window watching the moonlight paint silver across the mountains, and they would talk. At first, their conversations were careful, guarded. Eleanor asked him about the castle, about the history she saw reflected in every painting and tapestry. He answered with the authority of someone who had lived through the events depicted, who had known the faces in the portraits when they were still young and breathing. His memory stretched back further than she could comprehend, and listening to him speak was like touching the pages of a history book written in blood and sorrow. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. Eleanor found herself waiting for nightfall with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself she stayed because she had nowhere else to go, because winter was indeed coming, and she would not survive alone in the wilderness. But the truth she barely dared acknowledge even to herself, was that she was curious. More than curious. She was fascinated by him. Dracula was nothing like the monster from the stories. He did not rage or threaten. He did not loom over her with predatory intent. Instead, he was thoughtful and articulate, with a dry wit that surprised her and a depth of knowledge that seemed bottomless. He spoke of philosophy and art, of the rise and fall of kingdoms, of poetry written in languages long dead. He played music for her on instruments she had never seen, melodies that made her heart ache with their beauty. But there were moments, brief flashes, when she saw the darkness in him, the way his eyes would track movement with inhuman precision, the stillness with which he could sit, so absolute it seemed he did not breathe at all, the coldness of his skin, the one time her hand accidentally brushed against his. Reminders that no matter how human he seemed, he was not, could never be. One evening, Elena found herself in a tower room she had not explored before. It was circular, with windows all around offering a panoramic view of the mountains and forests below. The moon was full, hanging in the sky like a silver coin, and its light flooded the room with an ethereal glow. In the center of the room stood an easel with a half-finished painting, and scattered around it were dozens more canvases, some complete, some barely begun. Eleanor moved closer, studying the paintings. They were all landscapes, she realized, mountain vistas, forest scenes. The same view from these windows painted over and over again in different seasons, different weather, different times of day. The technical skill was extraordinary, but there was something else too. A loneliness that permeated every brushstroke, a sense of someone trying desperately to capture beauty they could no longer truly feel. "You paint," she said softly, sensing his presence behind her, though she had not heard him enter. "I used to," Dracula replied. "When I was still human, I painted portraits, faces, people. After I became what I am, I found I could no longer bear to look at human faces long enough to capture them, so I turned to landscapes instead. Things that do not change, things that will be here long after everything else has turned to dust." Eleanor picked up one of the completed paintings, a winter scene with snow covering the pine trees like a burial shroud. "It's beautiful," she said, "sad, but beautiful. That is an apt description of most things in my existence." She set the painting down carefully and turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, the moonlight turning his pale skin almost translucent. He wore simple clothes tonight, a white shirt open at the collar, dark trousers, no coat or vest. Somehow the informality made him seem more dangerous, more inhuman, less like the cultured nobleman and more like the predator he truly was. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked. "Becoming what you are?" Dracula was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," he said finally, "every hour, every moment of consciousness. I regret it more than I can possibly express. Then why? Why did you choose this? I did not choose it." "Not exactly." He moved into the room, but kept his distance from her, as if aware that his proximity might frighten her. "I was dying, wounded in battle, bleeding out in the mud while my enemies advanced. A creature found me there, something ancient and terrible, and it offered me a choice. Death or eternal life at a price. I was young and foolish and terrified of dying. I accepted without understanding what I was truly agreeing to. And now you are trapped. Now I am trapped." He looked out the window at the moonlit landscape. "I cannot die, not truly. I cannot age or sicken or fade away like normal men. I am frozen in this moment, this body, this curse, for eternity. Unless someone drives a stake through my heart or takes my head from my shoulders, I will endure long after everyone I have ever known has crumbled into dust." Elena moved closer to him, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. "Could you not simply end it yourself? Walk into the sunlight? There must be ways. There are." Dracula's hands clenched at his sides. I have thought about it countless times. I have stood at the edge of dawn and felt the pull of oblivion, but something always stops me. Perhaps it is cowardice. Perhaps it is the small, foolish hope that one day I might find redemption. Or perhaps I have simply existed for so long that I no longer know how to stop existing, even when existence is agony. Elena's heart twisted with an emotion she could not name. She should not feel sympathy for this creature. She should not care about his pain or his regrets, but she did. God help her, she did. "What was your name?" she asked. "Before, when you were human. What were you called?" He looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. "No one has asked me that in centuries." "Will you tell me?" "Vlad." His voice was barely above a whisper. "My name was Vlad. I was the son of a dragon lord, a warrior prince sworn to defend these lands against invaders. I had a wife once, children, a life, all of it lost to time and transformation, and the countless horrors I committed after I became this." "Vlad," Elena repeated softly, tasting the name. "It suits you better than Dracula." Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and raw. "Do not do that," he said. "Do not try to see the man I was. That man is dead. He died the night the creature's blood entered my veins and rewrote everything I was. What stands before you now is an echo, a shadow, nothing more." "I don't believe that," Elena said, and she was surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "If you were truly just a monster, you would not grieve for what you have lost. You would not paint these lonely landscapes or build chapels or refuse to feed on human blood. Monsters do not struggle with guilt or long for redemption. But you do." Dracula stared at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Hope. Fragile and desperate and almost painful to witness. "You should not stay here," he said abruptly. "You should leave while you still can, before you start to see things that are not there, before you convince yourself that I am something I am not." "And what if I'm right?" Elena challenged. "What if there is more to you than you want to admit? Then God help us both." Dracula turned away from her, his shoulders tense. "Because nothing good can come of this. Nothing good can come of a mortal woman feeling compassion for a creature like me." "Why not?" "Because compassion turns to affection. Affection turns to something deeper. And I have learned through bitter experience that love is the most dangerous thing that can exist between the living and the damned." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Elena's heart pounded. They had only known each other for days. There could be no question of love. Could there? But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Something was growing between them, something that defied logic and reason and every moral teaching she had ever received. When she was with him, she felt seen in a way she never had before. He listened when she spoke. He valued her thoughts, her opinions, her presence. He did not try to control or diminish her. And beneath the monster, she could see the man he had been, the man he still was in some deep, buried part of himself. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quietly. "You should be. But I'm not." Dracula turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her shiver. There was hunger there, but not the kind she had expected. It was not a hunger for blood or violence. It was a hunger for connection, for understanding, for something he had been denied for so long he had almost forgotten what it felt like. "Elena," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "Please, do not offer me something I cannot accept. Do not look at me like that. Do not make me hope for things that can never be. Why can they never be? Because you are damned, because I am mortal. Are those reasons enough to deny ourselves even a moment of peace?" "Yes," his voice was harsh now, almost angry. "Yes, they are. I have lived long enough to know how this ends. You will grow old while I remain as I am. You will wither and die while I continue on, trapped in this eternal existence, carrying the memory of you like another wound that will never heal. I cannot endure that. I will not." "Then perhaps," Elena said, her voice shaking but determined, "perhaps you should stop thinking about centuries from now and simply accept what is being offered to you right now. This moment, this connection. Is it not better to have something beautiful, even briefly, than to have nothing at all?" Dracula looked at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes, the desire to reach for what she was offering, and the absolute certainty that doing so would only lead to more pain. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The moonlight streamed through the windows. The paintings watched in silence. Then, slowly, Dracula extended his hand toward her. Eleanor took it without hesitation. His skin was cold, unnaturally so, but his grip was gentle. He looked down at their joined hands as if seeing a miracle. "I cannot give you a normal life," he said quietly. "I cannot give you children, or a home in a village, or any of the things you should have. I can only offer you this castle, my company, and whatever protection my cursed existence can provide. It is not enough. It will never be enough." "Let me decide what is enough," Elena said, and so she did. The days turned into weeks. Elena abandoned any pretense of leaving. She moved through the castle not as a guest, but as someone who belonged there, and Dracula, for his part, seemed to bloom in her presence. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, showed her treasures he had collected over the centuries, and told her stories of the world beyond these mountains, places he had seen before he had retreated to this self-imposed exile. Marta watched their growing closeness with an expression that might have been approval or might have been sadness. She said nothing, but she began to treat Elena differently, with a deference that suggested she understood something fundamental had changed. Elena told herself it was not love, it could not be love. But when she lay in her bed at night, staring at the canopy above her, she knew she was lying to herself. She thought of him constantly, the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare, precious moments when he let his guard down, and she glimpsed the man beneath the monster. She was falling, had already fallen, and there was no safety net to catch her. One night, she found him in the music room, standing before the grand piano, with his hands resting on the keys but not playing. He looked lost in thought, his expression distant and melancholy. Elena approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but he sensed her presence as he always did. "I was remembering," he said without turning around, "the last time someone played this piano. It was my wife. Over 400 years ago. She played beautifully. I used to sit and listen to her for hours." Elena felt a pang of something she recognized as jealousy, which was absurd. The woman had been dead for centuries. "What do you remember about her?" "Everything. Her laugh, the way she hummed while she worked, the softness of her hand in mine." Dracula's voice was thick with old grief. "I remember the day I told her what I had become. The horror in her eyes, the way she recoiled from me. I remember her begging me to kill her rather than transform her into what I was. And I remember honoring that request, even though it destroyed me to do so." Elena moved to stand beside him, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm sorry, do not be sorry." Dracula looked at her, and his eyes were dark with centuries of pain. "Be warned. This is what loving me means. This is what I bring to anyone who cares for me. Loss and grief and eventual destruction. I could not save her. I cannot save you. All I can do is watch as time claims everything I have ever valued." Elena took his cold hand in both of hers. "Then we will make the time we have count," she said. "Every moment, every conversation, every night we have together. We will fill them with so much beauty and meaning that when my time comes, you will have enough memories to sustain you. Is that not worth something?" Dracula pulled her close, and she felt his forehead rest against hers. His breath was cool against her skin, not warm like a living man's, but somehow right nonetheless. "You're either the bravest woman I have ever known," he whispered, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Elena said, and felt him smile against her skin. They stood like that for a long time, two impossible creatures finding comfort in each other's presence, while outside the windows the moon traced its arc across the sky and the mountains stood witness to their forbidden tenderness. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance, burying the forest in snow and turning the castle into an island of stone in a sea of white. Eleanor watched from the tower windows as the world transformed, beautiful and terrible, and utterly isolated. No one could reach them now, even if they wanted to. The roads were impassable. The villages far below were cut off from each other, each family huddled around their fires waiting for spring. But inside the castle, warmth endured. Fires burned in every hearth. Candles pushed back the darkness, and Elena found herself happier than she had ever been, which seemed like madness given where she was and who she was with. But it was true nonetheless. She and Dracula fell into a rhythm, a dance of companionship that deepened with each passing night. He taught her things she had never imagined learning, languages, both living and dead, the stars and their movements, history that had never been written in any book because he had lived it himself. She in turn taught him things he had forgotten or never known, how to laugh without bitterness, how to enjoy small moments without weighing them against the vastness of eternity, how to be present in a way he had not been for centuries. Marta observed it all with quiet approval, though she never spoke of it directly. Sometimes Elena would catch the old woman watching them together, a knowing sadness in her eyes, as if she understood exactly what was happening and also understood how it must end. One evening, Elena found Dracula in the library, surrounded by ancient texts. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. There was a tension in him, a barely contained excitement she had rarely seen. "What is it?" she asked, moving closer. "I have been searching for something," he said, gesturing to the book spread before him. "For weeks now, ever since you arrived, and tonight I may have found it." "Found what?" "A way out." Dracula's voice was hushed, reverent. "A way to break the curse, to become human again." Elena's heart stuttered. "That's possible." "Perhaps. I do not know. But there are references here, in texts so old I had forgotten I possessed them. Stories of vampires who found redemption, who were released from their curse through acts of true sacrifice and faith. It has been done before, though rarely. So rarely that I had dismissed it as myth. But now, with you here, I find myself daring to hope." Elena sat down slowly, her mind racing. If it could be broken, if he could be restored to humanity, then everything would change. They could have a real life together, a future, children perhaps. All the things that seemed impossible might suddenly become possible. "What would it require?" she asked. Dracula's expression darkened. "That is the question, is it not? The texts are vague. They speak of sacrifice, of choosing love over darkness, of accepting death as the price of redemption. But they do not specify how. They do not provide a map or a ritual or clear instructions." "Then we will figure it out," Elena said firmly. "If there is a way, we will find it. You do not understand the risk." Dracula reached across the table and took her hand. "If we attempt this and fail, the consequences could be catastrophic. The curse could strengthen. I could lose what little humanity remains to me. Or worse, you could be harmed in the process. I will not put you in danger." "I am already in danger," Elena said. "I am in love with a vampire. I live in a cursed castle. I have abandoned everything I knew for a future that may not exist. Do not try to protect me from risks I have already chosen to take." Dracula studied her face for a long moment, then pulled her close. His lips brushed her forehead, cold and gentle. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, "and I do not deserve you." "Then become someone who does," Elena said. "Find a way to break this curse. Become human again. Give us a chance at a real life together." "I will try." His arms tightened around her. "God help me, I will try." But trying, they discovered, was far more difficult than either of them had anticipated. The texts were contradictory, written in languages so archaic that even Dracula struggled to translate them fully. Some suggested that the curse could only be broken by the vampire willingly accepting death. Others hinted at rituals involving sacred objects and holy water. Still others spoke cryptically of love as the key, but offered no explanation of what that meant. Days turned into weeks as they researched. Elena spent her time reading everything she could find, cross-referencing obscure passages and searching for patterns. Dracula pored over books he had not opened in centuries, seeking answers in texts he had once dismissed as superstition. Marta brought them food and drink, though Dracula never ate, and Elena often forgot to, so consumed was she by their quest. The castle itself seemed to sense what they were attempting. Strange things began to happen. Doors that had been sealed for decades suddenly stood open. Rooms Elena had never found before revealed themselves. In one such chamber, they discovered a chest filled with holy relics, crosses and vials of blessed water, and fragments of what might have been saints' bones. Dracula could not touch them without pain, but Elena gathered them carefully, sensing they would be important. One night, deep in the heart of winter, Elena woke from a dream that felt more like a vision. She had been standing in the chapel, but it was different somehow, filled with light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, and a voice, vast and terrible and somehow gentle, had spoken a single word: choice. She rose from her bed and went to find Dracula. He was in his chambers, a place she had never entered before. She knocked softly and heard his voice bid her enter. The room was sparse, almost monastic, a bed that looked as if it had not been slept in for centuries, a single chair, a window overlooking the mountains. No personal effects, no decorations, nothing to suggest that anyone actually lived here. It was a cell, she realized, a place of self-imposed penance. Dracula stood by the window and he turned as she entered. "You should be sleeping." "I had a dream," Elena said, "or perhaps a vision. I think it might be important." She told him everything, and as she spoke, she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Choice," he repeated. "That is the key. Not sacrifice in the sense of dying, but sacrifice in the sense of choosing to give up what sustains me. The blood, the darkness, the power, all of it." "Can you do that?" Elena asked. "Can you simply choose to stop being what you are?" "I do not know, but if that is what is required, I will try. For you, for the possibility of a life with you. I would give up anything." They spent the rest of the night planning. They would perform the ritual on the night of the next full moon, which was only days away. Dracula would fast, abstaining even from the animal blood he normally consumed, weakening himself deliberately. They would gather in the chapel with the holy relics, and there, before God and whatever other powers might be listening, Dracula would make his choice. He would renounce the curse, embrace mortality, and accept whatever consequences followed. The risk was enormous. If it failed, if the curse could not be broken, Dracula might be destroyed by the holy objects, or he might survive, but lose what remained of his humanity entirely, becoming the true monster the legends described. But they had come too far to turn back now. The hope of redemption, however slim, was worth any danger. The night before the ritual, Elena found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the castle, running her hands along the ancient stone walls, memorizing every detail. This place had become her home in a way nowhere else ever had. These cold corridors and shadowed rooms held more warmth for her than the village where she had been born, and the creature who inhabited them, the damned count who had saved her life, had become more precious to her than anything else in the world. She found Dracula in the chapel, kneeling before the altar as she had once knelt. He did not turn as she approached, but she knew he sensed her presence. She knelt beside him, and for a long time they simply remained there in silence, two souls seeking grace in a place built by cursed hands. "I am afraid," Dracula said finally. "I have not been afraid in centuries, but tonight I am terrified of dying, of living." Dracula looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "I have been this thing for so long I do not remember how to be anything else. What if I succeed? What if I become human again and discover that the man I was is someone you cannot love? What if mortality is harder than damnation?" "Then we will face it together," Elena said. "Whatever comes, whatever you become, we will face it together." That is what love means. Not just sharing the good, but standing beside each other through the difficult as well. You have more faith than I do. Then I will have faith enough for both of us. Dracula reached for her hand, and this time when he took it, Elena noticed something she had not noticed before. His skin felt less cold, not warm, not yet, but less like death and more like something in between, as if the mere intention of the ritual was already beginning to change him. "Tomorrow night," he said, "whatever happens, I want you to know that these past months with you have been the most precious of my entire existence. If I do not survive, if the ritual destroys me, I will go into oblivion grateful for the gift you have given me." "You will survive," Elena said fiercely. "You will become human, and we will have a life together, a real life with sunlight and seasons and all the things you have been denied. I will accept nothing less." Dracula smiled, and it was a real smile, full of warmth and hope, and something that looked almost like joy. "Then I will do everything in my power to give you that future." They remained in the chapel until dawn began to lighten the sky. Dracula retreated to his chambers, unable to bear even the indirect light of the rising sun. Elena went to her own room and tried to rest, but sleep eluded her. Her mind kept circling back to the ritual, to all the ways it could go wrong, to the terrible possibility that tomorrow night might end with her losing the only person who had ever truly seen her. But she also allowed herself to hope. To imagine a future where Dracula walked in daylight beside her, warm and alive and free from his curse, where they could leave this castle and explore the world together, where they could build something new, something untainted by the weight of his dark past. Marta found her in the afternoon, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. The old woman sat beside her without speaking for a long time. Then, quietly, she said, "You love him." It was not a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes, I love him. Is that so wrong?" "Wrong?" "No." Marta shook her head. "Dangerous, perhaps. Tragic, certainly. But not wrong. I have watched him for many years. I have seen him suffer and rage and despair. And I have never, in all that time, seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. If love can save him, then perhaps your love will be enough. And if it isn't, then at least he will have known it before the end. That alone is a gift beyond measure." Elena turned to look at the old woman. "Will you help us? Tomorrow night during the ritual. I will do whatever is needed." Marta's expression was solemn. "I have served him for most of my life. If there is a chance to free him from his curse, I will not stand aside." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet." Marta rose to her feet. "Tomorrow night will test all of us. But whatever happens, know that you have already worked a miracle simply by making him believe that redemption is possible. That is no small thing." After Marta left, Elena returned to the chapel. She gathered the holy relics they would need, arranging them carefully on the altar. The crosses and vials of blessed water, the fragments of bone and ancient scrolls, everything they had found in their research, everything that might help tip the balance in favor of redemption rather than damnation. The moon rose outside the windows, not yet full but close. Tomorrow it would reach its zenith, and they would attempt something that might be impossible. They would try to redeem the irredeemable, to restore humanity to a creature that had been divorced from it for centuries. And Elena, kneeling alone in the chapel with her hands clasped around her grandmother's cross, prayed with an intensity she had never known before. She prayed for Dracula, for herself, for the future they might have together if they could just survive the night to come. She prayed for mercy and grace and the possibility that even the damned might find their way back to the light. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains like the voices of all the lost souls in the world. And the castle, ancient and patient and full of secrets, waited to see what the next night would bring. The night of the full moon arrived with a silence that felt portentous, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Elena spent the day in the chapel, preparing everything with meticulous care. She arranged the holy relics in a circle around the altar, each one placed according to the instructions they had pieced together from the ancient texts. Candles burned at cardinal points, their flames steady and unwavering despite the draught that whispered through the stone chamber. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, heavy with the weight of what they were about to attempt. Marta came and went throughout the day, bringing fresh candles when the old ones burned low, ensuring that the fire in the small brazier never died. She said little, but her presence was a comfort. Elena sensed that the old woman understood the gravity of what was about to happen, that she too carried the burden of hope and fear in equal measure. As dusk approached, Elena changed into a white dress that Marta had provided. It was simple and unadorned, almost like a burial shroud, and the symbolism was not lost on her. Tonight was about death and rebirth, about one existence ending so that another might begin. She braided her hair and fixed her grandmother's cross around her neck, the small wooden pendant resting against her heart. When the last light faded from the sky and the full moon rose above the mountains, Dracula came to the chapel. Elena heard his footsteps in the corridor, slower than usual, and when he entered, she saw immediately how the fasting had affected him. He looked gaunt, his already pale skin now almost translucent, dark circles beneath his eyes. He moved with less grace than she had ever seen, as if the effort of simply walking required concentration. He had weakened himself deliberately, starving the curse, preparing his body for transformation or destruction. He wore white as well, a simple shirt and trousers with no adornment. His feet were bare, his long dark hair was unbound, falling around his face like a curtain. He looked young and ancient at the same time, beautiful and terrible, a creature caught between worlds. "Elena," he said, and his voice was rough, strained. "If this goes wrong, if I become something worse than what I am, you must promise me you will run. You will leave this place and never look back." "I will not promise that," Elena said firmly. "We face this together, whatever comes. Please." There was desperation in his eyes. "I could not bear it if I harmed you. If the curse takes me completely and I lose all control, I would rather die than hurt you. You won't hurt me." Elena took his cold hands in hers. "I know you. I know your heart, and I trust you completely." Dracula pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "You are braver than I deserve. Then prove yourself worthy of that bravery. Become the man you were meant to be." Marta entered the chapel then, carrying a silver chalice filled with blessed water. She placed it on the altar beside the other relics and stepped back, her expression grave. "The Master's chambers are locked," she said quietly. "If he transforms into something dangerous, the iron doors will hold him long enough for you to escape. But I pray it does not come to that." "It won't," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly. "It can't." They took their positions. Dracula knelt in the center of the circle of relics, his hands clasped in front of him. Elena stood behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder. Marta remained near the door, ready to act if needed. The candles flickered despite the still air. The moon's light poured through the windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Elena began to read from the ancient text they had chosen, Latin words that felt heavy on her tongue. She did not fully understand their meaning, but she poured every ounce of conviction into them, every hope and prayer and desperate wish that this might work. Dracula repeated the words after her, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, as if the very act of prayer was giving him power rather than taking it away. As they chanted, Elena reached for the chalice of blessed water. Her hands shook as she lifted it, knowing what must come next. The texts had been clear on this point. The vampire must willingly accept the holy water, must drink it and allow it to burn away the curse from within. It would be agony. It might kill him. But it was the only way. Dracula looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw absolute trust. He had placed his life, his soul, everything he was in her hands. The weight of that trust nearly broke her. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, know that I love you, and I love you." His voice was steady now, resolved. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you dying in that cave. I will love you for whatever time remains to me, whether that is minutes or decades. Do what must be done." Elena tilted the chalice to his lips. Dracula closed his eyes and drank. The reaction was immediate and terrible. Dracula's body went rigid, his back arching as if struck by lightning. A sound tore from his throat, something between a scream and a roar, raw and agonized. His skin began to smoke where the blessed water touched him from within, wisps of vapor rising from his hands, his face anywhere the curse was strongest. Elena wanted to stop, wanted to pull the chalice away and end his suffering, but she knew she could not. This was the price. This was what redemption cost. So she held steady, whispering prayers and words of love, keeping her hand on his shoulder to anchor him to this world, even as the curse tried to drag him down into darkness. The holy relics around them began to glow with a soft golden light. The crosses blazed as if on fire, but they did not burn. The vials of blessed water shimmered. The fragments of bone sang with a sound like distant bells. The chapel itself seemed to respond, the very stones humming with power. It was as if the building, consecrated centuries ago by Dracula's own hands, when he still believed in salvation, was waking up to fulfill its purpose. Dracula collapsed forward, his hands pressed against the cold stone floor. His entire body shook with tremors that threatened to tear him apart. Blood, red and human, began to seep from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes. Eleanor fell to her knees beside him, still praying, still holding on, refusing to let go no matter what happened. The light from the relics grew brighter, so bright it hurt to look at directly. It swirled around Dracula like a living thing, wrapping him in luminescence, and Eleanor saw the darkness inside him begin to unravel. She saw it like smoke being pulled from his body, black tendrils of curse and corruption writhing as they were dragged out into the light and burned away. Centuries of death and blood and darkness, all of it being purged in this single moment of transformation. And then, with a sound like thunder, the light exploded outward. Eleanor was thrown back, landing hard against the stone wall. The candles all extinguished at once, plunging the chapel into darkness broken only by moonlight. For a moment there was absolute silence, no sound, no movement, nothing. Eleanor pushed herself up, her ears ringing, her vision swimming. She could not see Dracula. The moonlight was too dim, the shadows too deep. Fear clawed at her heart. "Vlad?" she called out, using his true name for the first time. "Vlad, please, answer me!" A groan came from the center of the circle, a very human groan full of pain and exhaustion. Eleanor stumbled forward, and as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw him lying on the stone floor, curled on his side. She dropped beside him and reached out with trembling hands to touch his face. His skin was warm, not cold, not the temperature of death, but warm, with living blood flowing beneath it. Elena's breath caught as she pressed her fingers to his neck and felt it. A pulse, strong and steady, and impossibly, miraculously real. Marta appeared with a lantern, and by its light Elena could see the full extent of the transformation. Dracula's skin had lost its deathly pallor and now held the faint color of life. His lips were no longer bloodless, but touched with pink. His chest rose and fell with breathing that was not merely habit but necessity. He looked younger somehow, or perhaps just less burdened. The weight of centuries had lifted from him, leaving behind the man he had been 400 years ago. His eyes opened, and they were different too. Still dark, but no longer containing that inhuman gleam. They were the eyes of a mortal man, confused and in pain and gloriously beautifully alive. "Elena." His voice was a raspy whisper. Did it work? Yes. Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Yes, it worked. You're human. You're alive. You're free. Dracula tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a gasp. His hand went to his chest. "My heart," he said wonderingly. "I can feel my heart beating. I had forgotten what that felt like and the pain. God, everything hurts. That's what being alive feels like," Elena said, laughing through her tears. "Pain and sensation, and all the messy, wonderful reality of having a body that can be damaged and healed." Dracula reached up and cupped her face with his hand, and the warmth of his touch made her sob harder. "I can feel you," he said. "Really feel you. Not the cold approximation I lived with for so long, but actual warmth and texture and life. You're so beautiful. So perfectly, achingly beautiful." Elena helped him sit up, supporting his weight as he adjusted to the reality of being mortal again. His body was weak from the transformation, from the years of fasting and the violence of the ritual, but he was alive, truly alive in a way he had not been since his original death centuries ago. Marta approached cautiously, the lantern held high. "Master," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Is it truly you?" Dracula looked at her and smiled, a real smile with no trace of darkness or sorrow. "Yes, Marta, it is truly me, or perhaps I should say it is Vlad. Dracula is dead. The curse is broken. I am just a man now." The old woman's face crumpled, and she began to weep, great heaving sobs of relief and joy. She had served him for so long, had watched him suffer for decades, and now, finally, she was witnessing his salvation. Eleanor went to her and embraced her, and the three of them remained there in the chapel as the moon moved across the sky, basking in the miracle they had witnessed. Over the next days and weeks, Vlad slowly regained his strength. It was strange for him, learning to be human again after so long. He had to remember to eat and sleep. He tired easily, and his body ached in ways he had not experienced in centuries. But with each day he grew stronger, more vital, more alive. And with each day, his love for Elena deepened. No longer constrained by the curse, no longer separated by the gulf between mortality and damnation, they could finally be together fully and completely. They walked through the castle hand in hand. They sat together by the fire and spoke of the future. They made plans for the life they would build together once spring came and the snow melted from the mountain roads. Vlad taught Elena everything he remembered of the world beyond these mountains, all the places he had seen in his long existence. And Elena taught him how to live in the moment, how to appreciate the simple joy of being alive without constantly measuring it against eternity. One evening, as they stood together in the tower room looking out at the moonlit mountains, Vlad turned to Elena and took both her hands in his. "I have lived for centuries," he said. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed wonders and horrors beyond imagination. But nothing, in all that time, has been as precious to me as these past months with you. You did not just save my life. You saved my soul. You showed me that redemption was possible even for someone as lost as I was." Elena smiled up at him. "You did the hard part. You chose to change. You chose to give up everything you had been for the chance to be something better. I just believed in you. Then let me give you something in return." Vlad reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a band of gold with a single small diamond, and Elena recognized it immediately from one of the portraits in the castle. It had belonged to his first wife, the woman he had loved and lost so long ago. "I know I cannot give you the life you might have had," he said. "We cannot return to your village. We cannot live among people who would remember the stories of Count Dracula and fear what you have chosen to love. But we can stay here, in this castle, and make a life of our own. We can be happy together for however many years we are granted. Elena, will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came without hesitation, without doubt. "Yes, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you wish. I am already yours, and I always will be." Vlad slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He kissed her then, and it was different from any kiss they had shared before. It was warm. It was human. It was a promise of all the days and nights they would share together as husband and wife. They were married in the chapel a week later, with Marta as their only witness. It was a simple ceremony, but it felt more sacred than anything Elena had ever experienced. Vlad spoke his vows with a fervor that came from knowing how close he had come to losing everything. Elena spoke hers with absolute certainty, knowing that she was binding herself to this man not out of fear or obligation, but out of pure, unshakable love. When spring came, the snow melted, and the world turned green again. Vlad and Elena ventured out into the forest together, walking in sunlight for the first time. Vlad wept at the sensation of warmth on his skin, at the sight of colors he had not seen clearly in 400 years. He knelt in a field of wildflowers and let the sun wash over him, and Elena knelt beside him, sharing in his joy. They decided to remain in the castle. It was their home now, filled with memories both dark and light, but they began to change it, opening windows that had been sealed for centuries, letting in air and light. They planted a garden in the courtyard. They filled the rooms with life and laughter. They made it a place of warmth rather than shadow. Marta remained with them, serving not out of enchantment or obligation, but out of genuine affection. She had watched Vlad transform from monster to man, and she took fierce pride in the life he and Elena were building together. In the evenings, the three of them would sit by the fire, and Vlad would tell stories of the old days, but now they were just stories. The past no longer had power over him. Years passed. Elena and Vlad grew older together, their hair graying, their faces lining with the passage of time, but they never regretted their choice. They had built something beautiful in that isolated castle, something that defied all the dark legends that had come before. They had proven that love could triumph over even the deepest curse, that redemption was possible for anyone willing to seek it. And when Marta finally passed away in her sleep, at peace and surrounded by those who loved her, they buried her in the chapel with full honors. She had served faithfully, and she had witnessed a miracle. That was a legacy worth celebrating. Eleanor sometimes thought about the village she had fled from, the family who had rejected her, the man who had turned away from her love. She wondered what had become of them, whether they were happy or sad, alive or dead. But she did not wonder for long. That life was not hers anymore. She had found something better, something truer, here in the mountains, with the man who had once been a monster. Vlad often spoke of his gratitude, of how impossible it seemed that he should have been given a second chance at life and love. But Elena always told him the same thing. You earned your redemption. You suffered for it. You chose it even when it might have destroyed you. That is what makes you worthy. And so they lived, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk together into the light. The castle stood on its mountain, no longer a place of dread, but a place of hope. And within its ancient walls, love endured, stronger than curses, deeper than damnation, eternal in a way that had nothing to do with immortality and everything to do with choice. On quiet nights, when the moon was full and the mountains were silver with snow, Elena and Vlad would stand together in the tower room and look out at the world. And Vlad would take Elena's hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse of her blood, and he would thank whatever powers had guided her to that cave on that storm-ravaged night. Thank them for giving him one more chance. Thank them for showing him that even the damned could find their way home. And Elena, looking at the man beside her, the man who had been a monster and chose to become something better, would squeeze his hand and smile, because she knew with absolute certainty that they had been given something rare and precious, not a fairy tale ending, but something more real and more beautiful. A life built on forgiveness and hope and the unwavering belief that love could redeem even the most broken soul. The curse was broken, the darkness had passed, and in its place, light endured.